For Wednesday, June 28th, 2023. John, thank you again for being with me.
Thank you, David,
And,
for that kind invitation again.
we will, hold on one second here. Let me just close that out. Yeah, let's see. So we were gone last week. I was in San Diego on a short vacation, not long enough. And then, so we sent out the email. Let's see who we have show up today. And today I thought we would, the title that I came up with is a Credit Myths Debunked. So normally this is based off of questions that we get that come in, posts on our Facebook or our Instagram, and to some degree it's just stuff that that I see in the blogosphere when it comes to credit. But a lot of it is really directed mostly towards us, questions that we typically get pretty frequently. So I thought I would run through them while I see some people jumping on, and let's start off with the first one. And then for everybody watching, it's a Q&A session. So if you've got questions, that's what we're here for. Feel free to drop them in the note section here or the comment section. It'll pop up on the screen and we'll answer it for you. Okay, so I went fancy this time, John. Normally I would just ask you the questions and then we answer them, but this time, oh no, look what I did. I had a few minutes extra today. So
So,
we,
oh,
so we got a little pop up on the screen.
that's high quality.
I'll tell you what, you can tell by the slight blur in the font that this was really just a screenshot that I did, but the highest of quality of screenshots you can do. Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
that looks like Cambria 12-point font.
It may very well be that. Your font eye is solid. All right, so what do we got here? So we've heard this one a million times before. And in fact, I just got this one probably a couple of times today. I know for sure yesterday I got it. Should I update my name and address or addresses if people have multiple addresses on the PII section of the credit report? So for everybody, that is the personal identifiable information section on your credit report. It's usually, depending on the credit report you get in this layout, it's usually one of the first things that you see underneath your score is your name, your first name, last name, any other otherwise known as names that are on there. And then you got your address and date of birth and employer and all that good stuff on there. Well, John, as you know, there is a prevailing thought that if I go in there and I delete, maybe I have a maiden name or I got some other names or my old addresses, especially, this is really what it's targeted, is if I get rid of these addresses that this will improve my chances or improve the dispute process. I'm going to move that down a little bit. It'll cover our names, but I think everybody knows who we are. All right. John, can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Well, let's tackle the names portion of this first. So should I update my names? I mean, it's not uncommon for people to have multiple variations of their name on a credit report. And so you'll see things like, John Ulzheimer, Ulzheimer, comma John, John with my middle initial, then my last name. So there's, and the more complicated of a name you have, and perhaps if you've hyphenated your last name, then you're going to see a bunch of what are called either AKAs or FKAs, also known as or formally known as, listed on your credit report. And I've seen some credit reports where a consumer's had 24 AKAs or FKAs in addition to whatever they're currently going by as far as their names, their name. So there's a limited number of ways that information about your name gets on a credit report. So most of the names that end up on a credit report are actually provided ultimately by the consumer in one form or another. So when they've applied for credit, they've filled out their name. When they've opened an account, if they've gotten married, then they've made a formal name. They've likely made a formal name change. If they've gotten divorced, they may have made a formal name change or a formal name change. So it's not unusual that people change their names or end up with multiple name variations on their credit reports. So now let's answer your question, which is kind of tackling the theory that somehow names act as an anchor between information in a credit bureau's file system and then a particular consumer. So it's anything in the consumer information section of a credit report is used for matching. And that's not a secret. Everyone, if you spend 2 seconds online, you can find articles about the credit bureaus and the matching logic that they use to associate information with a particular consumer. But changing your name or trying to get former names removed from a credit report, while it might seem like it's like a next gen method of disassociating yourself with information, it also kind of presumes that the credit bureaus are dumb, and they're not.
Yeah.
If you have any familiarity with the credit bureau's matching logic, there are thousands of different permutations for association. And so you can delete all of your former and your FKAs and your AKAs, and the likelihood of that somehow disassociating you with information is mythical. And that's even if you have a bunch of information on your credit report that you opened under a name, and then now you go by a different name, and now somehow you think that by removing that former name that you're removing the credit bureau's ability to associate you with that information. So look, if you're OCD like me and you want to do some housekeeping on your credit report and you don't want all those names to remain, or especially the ones that are clearly typos, then you can ask the credit bureaus to remove them. And certainly that'll clean up kind of the cosmetic mess that they can make on a credit report. But you shouldn't expect that is going to somehow break any sort of tie or relationship that you may have with information. The addresses are, and here's why this should be an easily accepted and debunked myth, is that the credit bureaus don't really put up a fight when people ask them to remove names. They also don't really put up a fight when people ask them to remove former address. I mean, you can't remove your current address. You have to have a current address on the credit report, but you can certainly ask them to remove former addresses. And they really don't put up a fight when you ask them to do that. And generally they will just remove those things and then send you an updated copy of your credit report. If those things were so important to them for matching, why would they roll over and just delete all those things just at a consumer's request? If that was actually true, then it would be like the greatest discovery in the history of credit repair. But so addresses obviously end up on credit reports a limited number of ways as well. Most of them are provided by your creditors, either your current or former creditors, because you use that address as your current billing address at some point in time. And there are other ways. So LexisNexis plays a part in this as well. LexisNexis is also used to validate addresses, or provide address information not only to credit bureaus but also to lenders. So, but certainly, if you look at your credit report, you generally don't have as many addresses as you would variations of your name. But again, if you're OCD and you don't want an address where you live, I'll give you a great example for me. I used to live in Jacksonville, Florida. I lived in Jacksonville, Florida before and when I got married. And that's been almost 27 years. I still have that address on my credit report. Does it bother me? No. Is it ancient? Yes. Whenever I pull my credit report from time to time, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was my address in Jacksonville, because I've long since forgotten what my actual address was. So, but yeah, if you're OCD, you can certainly ask the credit bureaus to clean off all those former addresses. Or if you've never lived at one, that's certainly, you don't want that address on a credit report. Or if they have the address wrong, so sometimes an apartment number may not be the accurate apartment number where you lived, and you can certainly ask them to clear that stuff off. But again, the same with former names or AKAs. You shouldn't expect some sort of miraculous transformation of your credit report as a result.
Yeah, that is one of the big myths that when I went on, I think I talked to you about this not too long ago. I went on TikTok and I was following a couple of people that are in the space, and when I see them talking about removing old addresses to improve your chances of getting something deleted. I'm like, well, it still lives on, and it's something that still is perpetuated. Okay, now for those of you who that are just joining us, feel free to say hello, introduce yourself. Don't be shy. If you have any questions for us, please put it in the comment section. We'll put it up on the screen. We'll answer it for you. And the next one, John, another common question we get is, does a negative mark on my credit report drop my score for 7 years? So we can see it for the most part, depending on what it is, of course. But some things are a little bit more difficult to see, like maybe a late payment. Although technically it's going to be on there for 7 years, being able to see it cosmetically is a little bit more difficult after the 24-month period, depending on what kind of report you've got.
Right.
But let's talk about what is a derogatory account or derogatory mark do to the credit? Is it doing damage for the full 7 years until it drops off?
So the answer to this one is going to be maybe. There are certainly some scenarios where a negative incident on a credit report, your score will not fully recover until that thing is gone, and that may be 7 years. There are many other scenarios whereby the negative item may be cosmetically present on a credit report, but it's not meaningful to a credit score, so it's not actually considered in the scoring process. So even though it's there, it doesn't have any measurable impact on a credit score. And so in that scenario, the answer would be no. And I'll give you a really good example of that. If you have, 7 collections on your credit report, and you can't look at all 7 of those collections and say, well, every single one of those is having a discrete negative impact to my credit report or credit score. And therefore, if I get one of them removed, my score will go up some amount of points. So that's going to be the no scenario. But certainly I don't want to misrepresent that there is a possibility that if you have something negative on a credit report, that it could, there is certainly a possibility that your score will not recover fully until the item is gone. And if you have a bankruptcy, a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, you actually could change that 7 to a 10. And there's a very good possibility that your score will not fully recover to the pre-bankruptcy level, assuming it was good at one point, until bankruptcy is gone.
Yeah. Largely, though, if we're talking about, maybe you can expand a little bit on the difference between a minor and a derogatory and a major derogatory, and how that might play out over the 7-year period.
Sure. So first thing I think is important. Let's define what we mean by negative or derogatory. Some people say, well, inquiries are derogatory because they make your score go down, or credit card debt is derogatory because it can make your score go down. So I think and that's a reasonable statement for a layperson to make, because they don't understand that in scoring systems, there really is a definition of what is derogatory versus what is not derogatory, but may still be influential to a credit score. Mm-hmm. So derogatory or negative, as this question is worded, derogatory means, it's very unusual that in our world, the way something is written is actually what it means. And this is one of those rare scenarios. Derogatory really does mean derogatory. So it's a record of some sort of mismanagement of a relationship that you have or had with a creditor, or something else that indicates non-performance with a creditor. And at one point, judgments and tax liens had to be thrown into this mix, but those are not on credit reports any longer. So, so anything that would be reasonably inferred as being derogatory. So having credit card debt is not derogatory. Having defaulted credit card debt is derogatory. Okay, so you can see the distinction between the two. So your question had to do with, well, what's a minor derogatory versus a major derogatory? So in the reason that's even a question is because in credit scoring systems, information is designated into 3 different buckets, if you will. There's major derogs, minor derogs, and non-bads. And non-bad is a statistician's way of saying a good. Okay, so if you have an American Express account that you're paying on time every single month and you've never ever missed a payment on it, that's referred to as a non-bad in the scoring community. We kind of generally, like the collective we, the people who don't run around building credit scoring systems every day, generally those things are referred to as good accounts because they're in
Mm-hmm.
a current
Yeah.
status or they're in good standing. So now let's talk about the Durag. So in Durags, you have this designation between major Durag and minor Durag. So I'm going to tell you what a minor Durag would include, and then everything else is a major Durag. The major Durag bucket is considerably more full than the minor Durag bucket. In the minor Durag bucket, it's going to be historic 30-day delinquencies and historic 60-day delinquencies. So if you were late on your car loan 2 years ago by 30 days, but you caught up, that's a minor Durag. If you were late on your visa last year for 30 days, but you got it caught up, that's a minor Durag. Everything else is a major Durag. Collections, bankruptcy, debts discharged in bankruptcy, settlements, foreclosures, repos, accounts that are currently delinquent by any amount of time, and then anything that was 90 days past due or worse in its history. Those are all considered major Durag. I may have missed them one or two, but anything other than that historic 30 and 60 is considered a major Durag to the extent that it really is a derogatory entry. And back when tax liens and judgments were on credit reports, they too were considered to be major. We just call them major Durags, major derogatory events.
Got it. Rukai, I hope I'm saying that correctly. What is the best and fastest way to increase your score?
Well, I'm going to answer this from a non-credit repair perspective. The most actionable way to increase the score is to pay off credit card debt. That's because you can, to the extent that you have a lower score because of credit card debt, and you have the capacity to pay it down or pay it off, your score could go up and go up considerably next month. So that's always the fastest way. There's a lot of other ways that your score could go up if these things happen, but they're not necessarily actionable. So you can't just say, get the bankruptcy deleted from your credit report. That's not really a realistic expectation. So I don't really ever, and that's really something you'd hear more from a credit repair person, not me. So generally speaking, it's going to largely be tied to credit card debt.
Yeah, over the 10 years, John, that I've been doing this and consulting people in the kind of credit restoration and maybe starting over again or trying to get a handle on the way credit works, one of the things that I've seen frequently is that potentially 100-point swing either way that is wrapped around credit card utilization. And I think a lot of people really underestimate how impactful overutilizing credit card debt is and what it can do to your score. And the other thing too is how easy it can happen. For example, I've seen this countless times, thousands of times probably, where people are, they bury their head for a while. They're trying to recover from some challenges on the credit. They've been kind of off the grid credit-wise for a while, and they start rebuilding. And a lot of people rebuild with that builder credit card. There's better options now, but secured credit cards have been for a while one of the things to do. And they get that $300 credit card, and they go out and have a fancy dinner with the spouse or boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. And then now they've got a $290 balance on it, and now they just watch their score tank 70, 80, 90 points or whatever it is. So especially when you're rebuilding, make sure that you're paying attention to that utilization.
There's a couple of other points that I think are important with respect to the credit card debt. Number one, it's been from my seat, what I have seen, not only personally, but also with other consumers and the movement of their scores in reaction to credit card debt. It appears that Vantage Score is more sensitive to changes in utilization ratios than FICO scores are. What that means, and for any of you who have, for example, a credit card with Chase. So if you have a credit card with Chase, you can see your your VantageScore credit score, the chronology of that score over time. And it's not unusual to see 50+ point swings in your score during months where your utilization, and I'm not talking about, David, I'm not talking about going from 2% utilization to 100% utilization. I'm talking about going from sub 10 to like 20 or 25. So it appears that Vantage scores, credit scores, are more sensitive to utilization than FICO scores are. And why does that matter, and why do we care? Well, because we know within the next couple of years, all mortgages are going to be underwritten using Vantage Score 4.0 and FICO 10T. So it's important that you and me, that we start talking about what is unique to that particular brand of scores relative to what's unique to, say, a FICO score, where in my experience, utilization, even spikes in utilization, more than just your normal kind of organic increase. Like one month, if you have tons and tons of new purchases on a credit card, the 50+ point swings aren't necessarily something you're going to see. So we're talking, I know we're still answering a question that was asked 10 minutes ago. What's the best and fastest way to increase your score? What's good for the goose is good for the gander. So if your score drops a ton because of a spike in utilization, it will recover just as quickly if that utilization is brought down. So it really is the most actionable, and depending on score brand, could be the most profound way to improve a score very quickly. A score that in a couple of years we're going to talk about as being part of the mortgage underwriting process.
Yeah, so I know that's going to be a crazy time. All right, a couple more questions here. Can I get my refund? I called a few weeks ago and still haven't received. So Glock, that's not us. Credit Versio is free software. We don't have any information on your billing or anything like that. That's going to be with whoever your credit monitoring company is that you linked with Credit Versio, and I have no idea who that is. We're compatible with a lot of different companies. As a general rule, when they pull a credit report, I don't think that they will refund you. Can't give a credit report back, but you can close out the account, and you would do that on the monitoring service that you linked with Credit Versio. Okay, Matt, are there retention rules for potential creditors for the information that a potential creditor, creditor gets when they pull your credit report? Can they pull your credit report every month and retain everything forever?
So I'm going to answer this so I'm going to answer this backwards. This seems to transcend a couple of statutes, one of which I'm an expert in, the other, or the others I'm not. So can they pull your credit report every month? If you have an existing relationship with a creditor, yes, it is a permissible purpose. That's straight out of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. It is permissible for a creditor to pull your credit report as frequently as they would like to, as part of the ongoing account management process. Some do it monthly. That's expensive, right? Because every time they do it, they've got to pay for it. Some do it less frequently than monthly. So the second part of your question seems to do with retention and retention policies. The Fair Credit Reporting Act, and I'm pretty knowledgeable about it, I don't believe has any language that dictates or requires a creditor to either retain a credit report for a certain period of time or to purge a credit report after a certain period of time. So I don't know the answer to that from a Fair Credit Reporting Act perspective, but there may be other statutes, federal or state, that define when creditors have to remove or how long they have to retain certain information like that. So I'm sorry, I was able to answer some of your question, but I apologize I wasn't able to answer all of your question.
Yeah, Mark, if that is in relation to something that, like another question you're trying to answer, maybe you ask that question in another comment, if you would. We can maybe get to maybe what's behind that question. Okay, do we have another one up here? Oh, yeah. Mark Diaz, how long does it take to hear back from a credit reporting agency after sending a challenge? Are they bound to respond in a certain amount of time? Well, you could ask no better person for many, many years, John worked for Equifax, and you did spend some time in dispute resolution, did you not?
I did. Yep, I sure did. So the answer to the first part of your question, which is how long does it take to hear back, and I'm assuming when you say challenge, you mean you filed a dispute with a credit bureau. So the answer to that question has changed over time. Interestingly, the Fair Credit Reporting Act gives them 30 days to complete an or what's in the act, it's called a reinvestigation. I don't know why it's called a reinvestigation. It kind of presumes that it's the second time you've done it and you're redoing it, but whatever. The statute calls it a reinvestigation. There are limited scenarios whereby that 30 days can be extended an additional 15 days. So if you send supplemental information to the credit bureau during the first 30 days, then you're going to give them an additional 15 by doing so. So from that perspective, they have 30 to 45 days for you to respond, or for you to quote unquote hear back from them. When that was written into the statute, that 30-day language, that predated fax machines, if that gives you any idea of just how old that language is.
Yeah.
That predates John's involvement in the industry, and this is my 32nd year. So even back when I worked at Equifax in the early 1990s, it was 30 days, and we had just started using fax machines to receive consumer disputes, and that was like cutting edge tech at the time. Now, obviously, everything is web-based. There are system-to-system connections over eOscar between the bureaus and like 14,000 companies that may have to respond to consumer disputes. And the Credit Industries Trade Association has indicated that most disputes are done within 14 days. There are some scenarios, especially kind of the question we talked about earlier about addresses. If there's no need for a credit bureau to contact a furnisher, meaning a data furnisher like a bank or a debt collector, they may make the change unilaterally just as a matter of policy, which may take less than 24 hours for them to update or change or delete something on a credit report. So number one, it depends on what it is that is being disputed and what period of time you're talking about, and whether or not you provide supplemental information. So the second part, are they bound to respond? First off, they're bound to respond, period. They have to respond. In fact, the act indicates that the credit bureaus have to either send you investigation results or cause a summary of the investigation results to be sent to you. And so that's generally what you're going to get no later than 30 to 45 days. But most of the time, unless they've deemed your dispute to be frivolous where they don't have to respond at all, generally you're going to get it within a couple of weeks.
Yeah. Yeah. To be safe, Mark, that's one of the reasons, or that's why we built into Credit Versio a 40-day update. If you're using Credit Versio to manage your disputes for you, it's going to give that 40-day timeline just to be on the safer side of extra time if it's needed. Okay.
I'll give you a little insider information, and I'm not sure this is definitely not a secret, but generally when FCRA lawsuits are settled, and most of them, the overwhelming majority of them, do not go to trial, and so they're either settled or disposed of some other way, like through a motion or a summary judgment motion. In the settlement context, there's an agreement between a consumer and usually a furnisher, and normally that settlement agreement includes some money, and also includes an agreement to either modify the way something looks on a credit report or to delete an item from a credit report. And normally those settlement agreements indicate that the furnisher will make a request to the credit bureaus to do something, not that they will guarantee that the credit bureau will do something, but to give them 60 to 90 days for some sort of a change to be made. So even the furnisher acknowledges that this may take a minute for a change to be represented on a credit report. Even that, which is odd, because generally speaking, when you update information on a credit report, it can happen almost in real time, or not more than within a couple of days. But I think just as a matter of CYA, they they'll under promise and generally will over deliver in that respect.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Mark, you are welcome. Muriel, can I explain credit Versio? I can, but you know what? Best thing for you to do that's going to be faster, easier, and a lot better than what I can do is just go to creditversio.com and watch the demo video right on the homepage. It's about 7 minutes, and it'll take you A to Z through the whole software. It'll show you exactly what it does. All right, John, let's move on to... Oh, here's another one. And again, for everybody watching, feel free to post your question. Be more than happy to answer it. And this is a big one, too. This is the one that puts fear in a lot of people. It says, does talking to a creditor reset the 7-year statute of limitations? So sometimes people are even afraid. Like I've seen posts where, so-called experts in the space have said, you don't even want to call a creditor like somebody who's charged off an account because that might reset the 7 years.
Yeah, so I think I know where this myth comes from. There's always a little bit of truth to every myth, right? There's a misunderstanding, or maybe the basis is it. So there's in the world of credit, there are two meaningful statutes of limitation. One is how long information that's derogatory can remain on a credit report. And that's straight out of the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The Fair Credit Reporting Act sets the statute of limitations for how long information that's negative can remain on a credit report. And, other than a Chapter 7 bankruptcy, which can stay for a decade, the filing, not accounts that are, or not debts that are discharged, but the actual record of the filing, and pretty much everything else, there's a 7-year limit for how long that information can be maintained on a credit report. There are exceptions to that rule, but the credit bureaus have never leveraged those exceptions. So generally speaking, like late payments, defaulted accounts, 7 years is it. Talking to the creditor, arguing with the creditor, none of that stuff changes that 7-year period of time. Nothing. There's nothing in the Fair Credit Reporting Act that indicates that the credit bureaus can ignore that 7-year rule if the consumer does certain things. It doesn't exist. So, all right. So we've gotten that one off the table. Now we have to talk about the other one, where the answer might be yes. In the world of debt collection, so in other words, stuff that's being collected upon by a third-party debt collector, there is a statute of limitation that is generally defined by the agreement you signed with your creditor. So if you signed a cardholder agreement or you signed a promissory note, there's language in there that dictates under what states' laws will kind of govern the agreement. If you have a debt that is being collected upon by a third-party debt collector, eventually that third-party debt collector will no longer be able to sue you to collect the debt. That is called time barred, meaning that there is a limited period of time for a debt collector to sue you. And once that period of time has passed, generally they're not allowed to sue you any longer because the debt has become time barred. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with credit reporting, right? They can still, in some states, it's 3 years. I believe in some states it's 5 years where it becomes time barred. But that doesn't mean that they still can't have it on a credit report for the full 7, because the two things don't really have anything to do with each other. It's my understanding that you can accidentally reset that clock if you make a payment to the debt collector or somehow promise to make a payment to the debt collector, that you can reset that particular statute of limitations, and then the debt would no longer be time barred. That's my understanding. Again, that doesn't have anything to do with credit reporting. So whether you make a payment, you don't make a payment, promise to make a payment, file a dispute, 7 years is it for collection accounts. So you're going to want to, obviously, I don't want to tell everyone to go out and hire lawyers. That's expensive. But you're going to want to do a little bit of due diligence before you start making payments on third-party collection accounts, which, by the way, I fully endorse you doing. You should pay your debts, right? But just be aware that there may be some sort of an impact on that particular issue of statute of limitations. And if you're paying it off, then who cares? Because no one's going to sue you to collect a debt where the balance is zero. They're only going to sue you to collect the debt where the balance is something greater than zero. So to the extent you've either settled the debt or paid the debt, then A, good for you, you did the right thing, assuming you owed it, and B, who cares what the time barred status is of a particular debt.
Yeah. All right, Matt's got another good question here. Let's bring this one up. 1099-C, we're getting some specifics here. A consumer dealt with it on federal taxes as required. Am I correct that credit reporting agencies from date, let me put that up again. 1099 was issued, must show zero balance, zero past due amount, and no additional late payments.
So I'm going to have to punt on this one. I'm an expert in a case where this is the exact issue, and I can't
comment on it. Yeah. Okay. Well, why don't I give my opinion on this, John? You can sit this one out just from what I've seen.
And so if someone ever deposes me and tries to use this video against me, this is David's opinion, not my opinion.
Yes. Let's make sure we make that very clear. Okay. So Matt, my understanding is
I can assure you that kind of stuff happens.
One of the things that's always entertaining for everybody watching that when I do these with John is John always has to come from a perspective that at some point there's probably going to be some intern somewhere at a law firm is going to have to comb through all of John's videos and every article you've written, which is a sizable quantity. I would personally hate to have to do that, looking for something that can be used against you. So that's definitely a unique, position to come from anytime you're answering questions. But so Matt, to answer your question, my understanding is yes, if a 1099-C was issued, whatever that dollar amount is, you can be taxed as regular income. And typically what we see on credit reports when 1099s are issued is a zero balance. And of course, there's nowhere on a credit report where it's going to show late payment or past due, or not late payments anyway, but there is a place where you can see the balance, and all that stuff is usually made into a zero balance. Because essentially, they're writing off the debt. You might have to pay taxes on that. May or may not. That's a question for your accountant, but that looks right to me. All right. Next question: do goodwill requests for removal ever work? John, I have a little bit of experience on that. Do you, or do you want to give a shot on that one, or?
Yeah, so I would suggest that they do work, but I don't want to represent that they are a slam dunk. I certainly have seen the goodwill requests work, but again, please don't think that, oh my God, John said they work, let's all send goodwill request letter. I would suggest that, and I don't know that anyone actually tracks the success rate of goodwill deletion letters, but I will tell you that from my experience, it's unusual when they work, and when they do work, there's usually a consumer who never misses payments, and it was just a really unusual, atypical occurrence, and not necessarily a consumer who's always late and just a problem. And now, boom, they send a very nice letter asking for a late payment to be removed, which that kind of makes sense, right? So, so yes, but please don't represent that it's going to be, that it's always going to work. You may have a different experience, David, than
I don't have a different experience, but these are things that because I've talked to so many customers over the years that when goodwill letters do work, I actually have heard back. And it's exactly like you said. There's some circumstances under which a creditor might do a goodwill removal, and it's typically, like you said, John, it's people who have a really good track record of payment. There is some kind of an anomaly that takes place. That is where they can offer up some kind of a decent excuse, and then they're back on track, and they have been back on track for a while. And then it's purely at the discretion of the creditor. And sometimes, the cases that I've heard where it was successful, usually there was a little bit of elbow grease involved. Like they sent the letter, they spent some time explaining, like, hey, I've been a great customer in the past. I've been on time for the last 7 years or whatever the time is. I had a few months where such and such happened. It's now fixed. You can see from my payment history now that I'm back on track. I'm asking as a favor, and that's the way you have to approach it. And then a lot of them pick up the phone and they'll call the creditor and see if they can get a manager on the phone. But it takes a little bit of work, and yeah, John, like you said, I don't think it works very often because creditors are obliged to report accurate information, at least they're as reported or as recorded by them, and you are asking them to go against what they've agreed to do by asking for a removal for a goodwill. And we're not talking about removals of collections or charge-offs or things. This is purely late payments that I'm talking about. I don't know of any other circumstances where that would even work. Okay.
One of the problems with goodwill deletions, not asking for them, but the furnisher doing them, is what's the difference between me asking for a goodwill deletion versus someone else asking for a goodwill deletion, and we have similar payment histories and similar relationships with the bank? Is there a policy in place where we all get a yes? Or is there a policy where we all get that some people get a yes and some people get a no, and now we have inconsistency, and that's a humongous problem if banks are doing things in inconsistent manners and don't even have a policy written about how to respond to those types of that's why it's not necessarily that furnishers don't want to do them. The problem is that the minute they start doing them, anything that a furnisher does to touch a credit report exposes them to FCRA lawsuits. Even if they're trying to do something helpful with their customer, I can assure you, you don't have to believe me, but I've been a part of a lot of credit related lawsuits as an expert, and I'll just say that no good deed goes unpunished in the world of punishment. So it's actually easier for a lender to say, you were late, no, than for them to say, you were late, you're a really good customer, you've been around a long time, yes. It actually exposes them when they do that. And that's, so that's the downfall of 12 straight years of Fair Credit Reporting Act an increase in the number of Fair Credit Reporting Act lawsuits is, consumers that may have gotten goodwill deletions in the past aren't getting them because creditors are sick and tired of all these plaintiff's lawyer mills that are filing repetitive and often, shakedown types of lawsuits. And so it's just easier for them to say, you know what, the answer is no across the board.
Well, yeah, I mean, think of if you don't have a policy in place, think of what that discovery looks like. It's like,
it's hard to argue that you have reasonable procedures when you don't have procedures, right? It's a whole lot easier to argue that your procedures are reasonable when you can show somebody, here they are. It's up to you to decide whether or not you think they're reasonable, but at the very least, here they are. It's very difficult to say these are reasonable procedures when you're like, but we don't really have any written down. We just kind of, do what we do.
Yeah, kind of making up on the fly. Yeah, big risk. All right. Muriel apologized in advance to see, she didn't apologize, but she's asking if we can understand her question. Can you ask the debt collector to delete it earlier if you're 2 months away before? That makes sense. So you're asking for like an early deletion for something that maybe is supposed to fall off in year 7, and you want to call them on month 6 year 6 9 months is essentially what you're asking.
So let me let you in on the worst kept secret in credit reporting. The credit bureaus don't run out the 7-year clock. The credit bureaus, as a matter of policy and practice, and this goes back to 30 years ago. This goes back to TRW. If anyone watching even remembers who the heck they are, they used to be the owner of the data that was the predecessor to Experian. So it's pretty commonly known that the credit bureaus will delete at 6 years, 9 months, and they won't run the clock out to a full 7 years. And the reason they do that, obviously, is it is a matter of caution. You're just being cautious. You don't want to run something out to the full 7 years. The challenge for them, if you've ever looked at a credit report, you'll notice that most of the dates are month and year, not month, day, and year. And so you could see something on a credit report that may be 7 years and a week old, but the month suggests that it's 7 years old. So the credit bureaus are actually pretty smart in that respect, that they'll delete at 6 and 9 versus run everything out to 7. So Muriel, if you were expecting a deletion in August of 2023, I assume you're adding 7 years to August of 2016, and that's where you got August of 2023. But that item, assuming it's a collection, it either is or was deleted at 6 years, 9 months. And so we're in June, we're about to be in July. So it's likely that the item is gone.
Yeah. All right. Very good. John, we are coming down to the end of it. Yep. Still got roughly a dozen people on. If anybody has any questions, feel free to post them up here. I think I had one more. Oh, yeah. Well, I got a couple more, but all right, here we go. Matt again. Matt's got good questions. How do CRAs calculate the 7-year reporting for a consumer who took out a loan, 2 weeks later had an accident, and was in a vegetative state for a year? No payments on the loan, only a CO date, charge-off date.
Matt sounds like a lawyer, so I'm all of his questions were related to the law. So Matt, if you're a lawyer, you should disclose that. That would be the proper thing to do, especially if you're a plaintiff's attorney, given that you probably know what I do for a living. So the CRAs, I assume you're asking about the 7-year statute of limitations for deleting defaulted accounts, which that seems to be, I'm interpreting your question, that seems to be the only way that I can interpret it. So it's actually not the CRAs that are calculating that 7-year date. Thank you. I appreciate that, Matt, clarifying. So it's actually the lender is the one who determines the date, what's called the date of first delinquency. And then the credit bureaus just add that 6 years and 9 months to that particular date. So it's not actually the credit bureaus who are dealing with, the loan and then the accident and then the vegetative state, and then it was eventually charged off. It's the creditor that's dealing with all of those issues. And so if you take out a loan in June and it's a first payment default, meaning that, the loan is never paid, then the date of first delinquency, and that's actually a real date in the credit reporting language, would be June. And so the credit bureaus would add 6 years and 9 months to that date, and that's when they would delete it. But that DOFD, or that date of first delinquency, the date that's used as the anchor date, is something, the responsibility of determining that date is on the lender, not on the credit reporting agency. Because if you think about it, no one has a loan with Equifax. No one has a credit card with Experian. You have loans and credit cards with Chase and Wells Fargo and Citibank and such. And so they're the ones that are responsible for reporting inaccurate. They may have come out as inaccurate. I meant to say an accurate date of first delinquency that's then used as that anchor date for the deletion clock, or for the obsolescence clock to start ticking.
All right. John, that takes us to 50 minutes.
This goes so fast.
I know. Great questions today. Really good
Yeah,
questions. And
really good questions. Matt gets
yeah,
questions of the day, I think.
yeah, no doubt. No doubt. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me and John today. I appreciate it. And we will, I will not be back on Wednesday. I will be out of town again, but we will follow up or we will continue the week after that on Wednesday. John, maybe you'll be here, maybe not. We'll see what we can work out. In the meantime, everybody, have a great rest of your week, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.
All right.
All right, take
Thanks,
care.
David.
Thanks, John.